Dr. Blaise Aguirre is a childhood and adolescent psychiatrist. He is an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard, and his newest book is I Hate Myself: Overcoming Self-Hatred and Realizing why you're wrong about you. Welcome to the show, Blaise.
Thank you so much for having me on, George. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig into everything with you. Tell us a little about your personal life, some more about your work, and why you decided to
Sh-
write the new book.
Yeah. I grew up in South Africa. I went to medical school in South Africa. I'm the eldest of eight children, uh, and born in four countries on three continents. So traveled a lot, saw a lot. Was very interested in philosophy but then that led to psychology and then medical school and psychiatry. And I think that of all the uh, experiences that people had in my field, psychiatry, obviously for me, the most devastating and potentially permanent was that of suicide. And although clearly suicide at any age is tragic, seeing young people taken early to suicide, um, it really got to me at a very profound level. And so I wanted to do something about suicide. And in 2007, I started a program dedicated for treating suicidal teens, and they came from all over the world to get dedicated treatment for suicidal behavior and self-destructive uh, behaviors such as self-injury and other behaviors like that. Um, the other thing that happened was that there appeared to be a rising tide of suicidal and self-destructive behaviors in teens and adolescents and young people. And so even though treatments like mine, a treatment known as dialectical behavior therapy, seem to significantly reduce the suicidal behaviors and self-destructive behaviors, we still didn't completely get on top of it. And we had tragically lost some patients to suicide, far less than statistics would have predicted. And there was this underlying theme that seemed to appear in patients who really struggled with suicidality, and that is, at some profound and core level, they did not like themselves very much to the point of self-hatred. And as somebody who wanted to work with suicidal teens and uh, uh, young young adults, I thought, well, what can we do about self-hatred? And there was nothing. There was no treatment approach. There were no. There was very little literature, very little research on self-hatred, and uh, and I thought, why is it that something that makes young people so vulnerable to suicidal thoughts and behaviors hasn't been addressed? And a couple of years ago, I just started uh, thinking about it, writing about it. And so, even though I'd written 19 other books, this to me was my most important book.
19 other books. That's amazing in and of itself, and there's a whole podcast episode waiting in there. So, I why do you think it was that this isn't a field that was studied?
You know, so I was thinking a little bit about this, and I've been thinking more and more about this. So the first thing is this. So let's imagine self-hatred as a headache. Now, imagine that you haven't had a headache, and then all of a sudden you have a headache. You've experienced non-headache, and then you experience headache, and you say, wow, there's a difference between non-headache and headache, and I really don't like headache. But now, if you were born with a headache, and you just believed that headache was your base state, why would you complain of something that you don't know a difference from?
Hmm.
So, so one of the things that I discovered with all these young people is that from a very, very early age, they felt that they were less than. They did not feel worthy. They felt that they were broken. So they had never experienced a non-broken state, a non-self-hating state. So it wasn't surprising to me once I started thinking about it that somebody would go and say, oh, I hate myself because they've never experienced non-self-hating states. And so, and yet it influenced so many aspects of their life, their employment, their relationships, their sense of self, their choices, etc. So that's what I think happened. I think that people wouldn't necessarily bring it up. And then, and then even when people would make ineffective, maladaptive choices, therapists wouldn't consider the construct of self-hatred. But when I started to ask these young people about self-hatred, they would say, "Yeah, of course I hate myself,"
Hmm.
and and then all the puzzle pieces seem to fall into place.
So I imagine that, like most things, there's a continuum of I
Hmm.
really hate myself to the point where I'm suicidal and, I'm not super happy with me.
Right.
But I've still had this headache for my entire life. And so it's just kind
Hmm.
of a dull pain that I don't
Hmm.
pay much mind to. I just sort of live with it.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I think that that's obviously, thank you for all of your work. And it's really sad to
Hmm.
think that there's all these people who are running around feeling that way.
Hmm.
What 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 do you attribute that self-hatred? Are there common sources of it?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is that all of the young people that I met with core self-hatred were highly sensitive people. So, I mean, there were many, say these people had siblings, and they'd been raised in the same families and maybe had similar kinds of experiences. But somebody who wasn't emotionally very sensitive would just say, if say a parent said, for example, "Oh, you're being lazy," it would just roll off their back and they would get on with whatever they were doing. To the highly, highly sensitive person, these labels, in the context of high emotionality is like super glue to these labels. And so when you're in a very deep emotional state, or you're a highly sensitive person, and at one level, maybe you're being called lazy, not hardworking enough, or you're being compared to your successful older sibling, or maybe there's more than that. Maybe there's physical and sexual and emotional abuse through the lens of a 5-year-old brain. It's all that you can see and it's all that you can know. And because the world doesn't make sense other than the context under which you live, you come to the conclusion that there must be something wrong with you. Not that there's something wrong with your parents or with your caretakers, because a child can't contextualize that. It's only much, much later on in life that we're able to step back and then sort of see the ways in which we were raised and the experiences that we had. But it's a little bit like a fish in water doesn't know that there's anything other than water. So the child in a in a in a toxic environment for them only experiences that toxicity and it internalizes that toxicity and determines that it has to be part of who they are. Because why is it that other people aren't suffering the way that they are?
Oof, that's so sad.
Yeah,
It's such a sad thing when you see young people struggling like this, and obviously you see the worst case scenario is suicide, that they kill themselves. But it's also terrible just to be going through life feeling like that and to not have the brain ability just because it hasn't developed to contextualize.
yeah.
So what are you hoping that the book does?
Well, the first thing is, if I were to say to you, one of the things you don't question, you don't wake up every morning and say, "Why do I speak English?"
Mm.
It's not a question that you ask yourself because, from very early on, you learned English and that was the only language that you spoke. And I mean, maybe if you spoke other languages, you'd say the same thing about those. But if you were maybe, I don't know, living in Iceland and no one spoke English, you'd have to then start questioning that. It's like, wait, this is the only thing I know. So what am I going to do about it? So the first thing that I want people to know is that they weren't born hating themselves. That it's not as if self-hatred is like a lung or a heart or a kidney. It wasn't part of who they were. They had to learn how to hate themselves. And that's the moment at which I first started getting some traction in trying to get people to overcome this idea that they were fundamentally flawed and that they had to, something happened in their environment that taught them that they weren't worthy. And uh, and it was fake teaching, it was false teaching. And that if they could learn to hate themselves, they could learn its opposite because love comes so much more naturally to the human heart than hatred does. And the other thing is that you cannot overcome hating yourself by hating somebody else. So even if there was a cruel person, even if there was a toxic person who maybe abused you physically, sexually, emotionally, mentally, hating that person would never help you overcome self-hatred. So those are just like some of the ideas that seem to start working with some of the patients that I started to kind of unravel this concept with.
And so I imagine that the hope would be, well, so probably somebody can read the book and piece it together themselves. And
Yeah.
then there's some people who say, wow, I need professional help. And so it's going
Mhm.
to give off ramps or on ramps for lots of different kinds of people.
Okay, so I realize I didn't completely answer your question. And so to get back to that, so yes, firstly, I wrote this for patients predominantly, and what I wanted them to do is go through the exercises that had helped my patients. And so even if they weren't in professional help per se, to guide them through a series of exercises that would help them at least challenge the idea that they were loathsome and deserving of self-hatred. There was a secondary desire that I had, and that is I wanted therapists to really begin to look at this construct in their patients, and then similarly, maybe work with their patients with the exercises in the book in terms of challenging the idea. So this was primarily written for, and I use the word patients because they were my patients, but I mean, since I've written the book, people have come out of the woodwork. There are people who don't have a major mental illness who experience self-hatred. So this is really for anybody who experiences this, whether they have a mental illness or not.
And is it common? I've got kids and I'm trying hard not to mess them up. And the last thing I would ever
Mm,
want
mm,
is for my
mhm,
child to hate themselves.
mm.
And sometimes I slip up and say, "Oh gosh, that was really dumb. Why do you do that?" And I'm
Exactly.
sure that that doesn't help.
Yeah.
But is it more so it's sustained, consistent negative stuff, or does it
I
all depend?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm a father of four, and I've certainly gotten very angry with some of their behavior, especially when they were teens. Probably said some unkind things. And I think in and of itself, in and of themselves, none of those statements per se are going to lead to kind of a construct of self-hatred, as long as you recognize that in an emotional state, what you said to your child was hurtful, and that and you can maybe re-examine what happened between the two of you, um, uh, or what the child did through just a more objective lens. Because from the child's point of view, I mean, I don't know, like kids jumping off a roof, like, what were you thinking? And it's like, that was crazy. And then, okay, but from their child's point of view, that made a lot of sense. It was fun. It was like, let me see how high I can jump, etc. And they're not thinking, that this is crazy. And so rather than just simply ostracizing, it's just to be able to sit. It doesn't mean that you endorse the behavior, but it does mean that you can have a discussion about it, in terms of like, how are you thinking about this? Could you hurt yourself, and maybe you didn't, or whatever it is. But it's sort of like that. There's a more uh, authentic or maybe real understanding that things make sense from a child's point of view, and even if you as an adult see it differently later on. So we say these things, but it's sort of sitting with your kid and saying, I said you were lazy, and I just want to say, like, that wasn't very kind. Now, you don't want to teach treat every single one of your children as fragile. I mean, I had four. Two of them, if they fell down on the soccer field and I told them to get their butts up, they would get their butts up and start running around chasing the ball. The other two would be very sensitive, and they would experience that as me being critical. And so you've got to know your kid. For some, I'm hardly saying, treat all your kids as fragile, but just, if the child who's more sensitive says, this is the way that you always think about me, you always think that I'm dumb, you don't think I'm as good as my older sibling, et cetera, that's an indication that maybe you need to listen differently to that child.
Thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned when I asked you earlier about why hasn't this been studied more? And a lot of the people that you would ask, they'd be like, yeah, of course I hate myself. I don't know where I am on that spectrum. I definitely don't hate myself, I don't think. I'm pretty happy with me, maybe to a fault,
Mhm.
but I'm also extremely hypercritical of
Mhm.
myself. So how does one self-diagnose? Or how does one say,
Mhm.
you know what, maybe there is some work that I can do here to make myself a
Mhm.
little bit happier and give myself some more grace?
Yeah. Well, I think, look, there's nothing wrong in and of itself per se, to be hypercritical. If you say, I did this podcast and I meant to ask this question and I didn't ask this question, and next time I'll remember to do X, Y, Z. So if that self-criticism leads to uh, a kind of a more complete version, a higher version of you, a kind of a version of you that you want to portray to the world and to your children, there's no problem with that. If that hypercriticism is that even if you complete the Wordle in one move, you sort of say, I should have anticipated what it was, so that nothing that you do is ever good enough, then what purpose is that serving? You've got to ask yourself, what purpose is that serving? And especially because other people might not notice those small glitches. So you have to sort of think, one, is this helpful or not? And if it's not, how do I let it go? But the other part of it is it external to me or is it not external to me? Earlier on, just as I was about to log on, my computer crashed, and I emailed you, and then we were able to find out another solution. Now, I didn't have control over that. I was disappointed, but for me to say, you know, I'm stupid. I should have anticipated that the computer could crash at any moment, and it's all because of me, doesn't serve me, and it's not actually consistent with what the facts are. It's to say, you know what, this thing happened. I am good, and but and it was something that happened that was external to me. It's not because I am a fundamentally flawed person. The self-hating person would say, of course this happens to me. I deserve this happening to me because I am a flawed person deserving bad things from happening to me. So it's sort of so that it has those two elements. First, is there something internal or external to you? And secondly, thinking about, is the self-criticism something that you can use as a productive fuel source?
Thank you. For parents who are listening and they want to do a good job for their kids and they have a scenario where one of their kids is as you described, they'll pick themselves up and go on their way, and then some are maybe more sensitive. Would you recommend them picking up and then going through some of these exercises?
So what's happened is, parents have asked me this question before, and what's been interesting is I've actually had emails from teens themselves with this experience who said, I got this book, I'm really enjoying it, and it's very, very helpful. Now, um, because in the book I do describe self-destructive thoughts and behaviors, if your child is young, if the child doesn't necessarily have a significant mental health condition. I would certainly recommend that if the parent is going to use the book and recommend it to their children, that they do it alongside so that they can contextualize some of the exercises. And it's not to say that everybody with self-hatred is going to think about suicide, but certainly that uh, you know, the ones that with mental health issues that end up on my unit do. But it is still a risk factor because because people with self-hatred often feel that they're a burden to others. So I would just say, you've got to know your kid. You also have to know, like some kids just have their parents' Amazon accounts and they'll just order the book independent of what the parents know. So know your kid if I don't think that there are some trigger warnings in the sense of discussing suicidal thoughts and behaviors because it's the ultimate loss. So
I appreciate that. Well, Dr. Gary, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for all your work. Where can people learn more about you? And most importantly, where can they get their copy of I Hate Myself, Overcoming Self-Hatred and Realizing Why You're Wrong About You?
uh, thank you so much. So I work at Harvard McLean Hospital, which is in Belmont, Massachusetts, and I work on a treatment center known as the word as 3 East, and so my unit is the number 3, the word east.org. And then I've added a little bit about myself on a website that my youngest son created called I Hate Myself book.com. So
Excellent. Well, if you enjoyed this as much as I did, show Blaze your appreciation. Share today's show with a friend who also appreciates good ideas. Pick up your copy of I Hate Myself, Overcoming Self-Hatred and Realizing Why You're Wrong About Yourself. You can do that at ihatemyselfbook.com. And it is also the number 3, East, EAST.org for some more about Dr. Aguirre's actual work. Thanks again, Blaze.
thanks a lot, George. I really appreciate it. And sorry for the earlier disruption, but really appreciate it. So,
No
um,
problem at all.
and just for just because I know my my editor would like to know how quickly does this go out?
So we'll have this out probably within a couple of weeks, but I will let you know the
Sounds
exact
good.
date. So
And this is just as an FYI. So I've got a new book called College Mental Health 101. So I've written 4 books this year, but College Mental Health 101 with some colleagues. And it already, I mean, it's coming out in a little bit, but just in anticipation of the new college year, it's transition a kid from high school to college, just if it's of any interest at some point. So
yeah, we'd love to have that conversation with you as well. So
brilliant. All right.
let's plan
Thank
on
you
it.
so much.
All right. Till next
And
time, remember, do your part by doing your best.
awesome.